Good evening. You're watching the news at 7:30 on ATV. I'm Emily Su.
And I'm Raymond Yeung. Here's a look at tonight's top stories.
Health chief warns that tainted Taiwanese cooking oil scandal could widen.
Chief Secretary calls on pan-Democrats not to boycott second public consultation on political reform.
Occupy Central followers get a taste of anti-riot measures in preparation for civil disobedience action. 3 local companies being investigated following the tainted Taiwanese cooking oil scandal insist they bought a different product and not the variety made from recycled gutter oil.
But over in Taiwan, even companies that bought the product and never used it are finding their businesses ruined by the slightest association with it. Yeung reports.
Hailed as Taiwan's #1 food stall before the scandal, Yichang Yufang is one of the latest eateries to find itself in the middle of Taiwan's gutter oil scandal. Owner of the food stall, Zhu Yichang, was brought to tears as she spoke of the incident. I've always run my business with a clear conscience, she said. I've always made sure my products were perfect. I never imagined something like this would happen in my life. Her food stall in Taipei's Nanmen Market purchased 2 cans of the tainted lard oil in August for testing new dishes. Despite the fact that no gutter oil reached any of the food on sale, Zhu says her stall has now seen customers drop by half. Well-known instant noodle producer Wei Li Foods has also been drawn into the scandal after it emerged that it used the tainted lard in 3 noodle products. They have been taken off shop shelves across the island. Taiwan's Food and Drug Administration says 235 companies bought CG fragrant lard oil, which contains recycled industrial waste, gutter oil from workshops. They then sold it to around 933 restaurants, but only 40 companies and manufacturers have confirmed they've actually used the oil. In Hong Kong, Secretary for Food and Health Ko Weng-man said the list would be very useful in helping local authorities pinpoint potential vendors who may be selling tainted products. He does not rule out the possibility of more names being added to the list and says the government will keep a close watch. 3 local companies are currently being investigated by authorities. They are Maxim's Group, Xingcheng Hong Provisions, and Dacheng Hong Holdings, also known as DCH. DCH and Xingcheng have both admitted to selling Changguan's lard products, and DCH has since handed over a list of about 20 clients to authorities. However, both insist the lard oil they bought was from a different line than the problematic CG fragrant lard oil. Maxim's made a similar statement, saying the Changguan lard they used in their pineapple buns is not gutter oil. But this afternoon, the Center for Food Safety confirmed that Maxim's had used the dodgy oil. The company told authorities that its mooncakes don't contain any lard from Changguan. Nevertheless, all 3 have since stopped using any lard oil from the Taiwanese company and have withdrawn all related products until test results confirm they're clean. After taking tainted dumplings off its shelves yesterday, Welcome removed a noodle product and a brand of satay sauce from its shops today. Yeung, ATV News.
Chief Secretary Carrie Lam has called on pan-democratic lawmakers not to boycott the government's second public consultation on political reform and vowed to try to get their support until the very last minute.
Financial Secretary John Tsang, meanwhile, urged both sides to stop competing against each other as it won't help forge a consensus.
The government's point woman on political reform today said the government is working hard preparing the second public consultation on political reform. Chief Secretary Carrie Lam stopped short of revealing exactly when it will kick off, but the government is expected to roll out actual electoral blueprints for people to choose from. Lam urged pan-Democrat lawmakers not to boycott the consultation, saying it would hinder the local legislative process for universal suffrage in 2017. All but one of the city's 27 opposition lawmakers have already signed a declaration to veto the government's reform package if it fails to meet international standards. And since China's top legislature laid down a tougher-than-expected framework for the 2017 poll 1 week ago, it's unlikely the government will win the support of 2/3 of the 17-member LegCo it needs to pass its electoral blueprint. Beijing capped the number of chief executive candidates at 2 or 3 and requires them to be patriots who will need to secure votes from over half of the official nominating committee. Opposition lawmakers have described the restrictions as fake and North Korean-style democracy. Lam vowed to try and garner the pan-democratic camp's support until the very last minute. She called on the public to express their desire for universal suffrage during the second consultation to help convince opposition lawmakers to change their mind. Meanwhile, it's that time of the week when financial chief John Tsang updates his online diary, and in today's entry, he expressed his concerns about the city's constitutional development. Tsang said although it's normal for people to have different views on the MPC's decision, he urged them not to compete against each other to see who's the loudest or has the most supporters. Opposing groups should take note of what each other care the most about and forge a consensus that way, wrote Tsang. Without naming anyone in the opposition camp, Tsang described those who think the government will roll out a fake universal suffrage proposal as not trusting the choice to be made by the city's 5 million eligible voters. He also expressed concern that if the SAR cannot have one person, one vote in 2017, the current heated debate will be repeated in 5 years, and very possibly, constitutional development will once again be put on hold. Former Commerce Minister Frederick Ma waded into the debate, saying he's disappointed with the MPC's decision. Labeling Beijing's framework as extremely conservative, he said it would be even harder for a chief executive chosen under such a system to win the people's support and govern smoothly.
Despite warnings from officials, the Federation of Students says it is pressing ahead with plans for a one-week class boycott at the end of the month.
The organizers say they've been spurred on by remarks the chief secretary made that they think support their actions. And Chang reports.
At the Polytechnic University in Hung this afternoon, leaders of the Federation of Students announced plans for a week-long strike beginning on the 22nd of September. Their announcement came minutes after Chief Secretary Carrie Lam warned striking students to express their views without breaking the law. The government's number 2 also advised them to make sure their class boycotts won't affect others and make sure their actions don't have any unintended adverse consequences. The students interpreted Lam's remarks as supportive, saying she basically told them not to turn something good into something bad. The organizers say at least 14 universities and colleges will join the boycott. A mass rally will be held at the Chinese University in Shatin on the first day of the strike. Protests will be held at Civic Square and Taymar Park near the government's offices later in the week. The Federation said its goal is to see all indirectly elected functional constituency seats in Lechko abolished. They also want the National People's Congress to issue a public apology to Hong Kong people over its highly restricted framework on political reform and the chief executive and his 3 ministers in charge of constitutional development to step down. If officials ignore their demands, the Federation said it might extend or escalate its campaign.
We will extend the date and the length of the university strike so as to generate more pressure. Secondly, we will also propose to include other non-cooperative actions, say in other areas, say the union neighbors, say the markets, to also have strike.
Activist group Scholarism is also planning to go on strike. As secondary school students don't have as much leeway as university students for skipping classes, organizers suggested students help relieve pressure off school authorities by filling in a form notifying them of their activities so their absence won't be counted as skiving off. It's unclear whether that will have any effect. Organizers have also arranged for lawyers, social workers, and teachers to be present during the strikes. Ann Chang, ATV News.
Water cannon was used on around 30 opposition lawmakers this afternoon in Tuen Mun.
They were taking part in a civil disobedience drill to prepare themselves for what authorities may throw at them during the Occupy Central sit-in.
About 30 pan-democrat lawmakers and pro-democracy activists were in Tuen Mun this afternoon for a civil disobedience drill. They were being trained how to react to police officers if or when they're forcibly removed for joining the Occupy Central movement's bid for a mass sit-in in the city's business hub. Occupy leaders plan to gather as much as 10,000 people to participate in their street blockade in response to the MPC's tougher-than-expected framework on Hong Kong's political reform. Water cannons were also part of the drill today. But organizers Organizers of today's exercise admit the pressure of the water cannons they brought in is not as strong as the police's. Democratic Party Chairwoman Emily Lau said the authorities owe Hong Kong people an explanation as to why the MPC's decision on political reform is nowhere to be found in the 2 reports SAR officials submitted to Beijing after a 5-month public consultation.
I think the government here and in Beijing must answer to the question, why is it that Beijing has come up with a proposal that cannot be found in the report of the administration? So is Beijing telling us that all those 5 months is a complete waste of time? They did not and would not listen to the views of the Hong Kong people.
Occupy leaders have yet to unveil the actual location and date of their mass sit-in, saying they don't want to be arrested before even getting there.
Overseas, there have been reports of artillery fire in eastern Ukraine just a day after a ceasefire was agreed between Kiev and separatist rebels.
It's the first violation of the deal and involved attacks from both sides. Joyce Wu reports.
Buildings were ablaze near the strategic port of Mariupol in eastern Ukraine, just a day after a ceasefire was declared. Fires across the city could be seen following an artillery attack. Residents scrambled to safety while tanks and armored personnel vehicles headed towards the blaze. Earlier, Ukrainian artillery could be seen still smoldering on the outskirts of the city. Meanwhile, carrying candles and singing religious songs, residents of the city of Donetsk, which has been subjected to months of bombing by Kiev's forces, called for calm as an uneasy peace enveloped the region. But many expressed doubts that the ceasefire will last. Kiev has been criticized for its relentless shelling of the eastern region, including civilian areas, which has killed more than 2,600 and created hundreds of thousands of refugees. Envoys from Ukraine, Russia, the separatists, and Europe's OSCE security watchdog approved the ceasefire in Minsk on Friday as part of a peace roadmap that also includes an exchange of prisoners of war and establishing a humanitarian corridor for refugees and aid. Ukraine had accused Russia of sending troops and arms into its territory to support the separatists, but so far the OSCE has not spotted anything of the sort. Nor has it been able to confirm Kiev's claim that Russia invaded the country, which prompted Europe to threaten more sanctions against Moscow. Russia denies sending troops in or arming the rebels and has banned most Western food imports in anticipation of the new sanctions. Joyce Wu, ATV News.
Still to come on ATV's main news. The Queen enjoys Highland Games as Scottish independent supporters lead poll for first time.
Big upsets at US Open with Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer knocked out in the semis.
Travel checkpoint. Traveling through India. Traditional lifestyle, modern development. Different angles bring a different India. Traveling the globe, tonight at 8:30.
唔好意思，我遲咗。
Hi， 陳 Sir， 咁都嚟開會啊？
學嘢啊嘛。點啊，張 Sir？ 上次睇你嗰堂，見你班學生反應好好喎。啲學生主動咗。
梗係啦，張 Sir 咁有創意。睇下個活動，俾啲意見啦。
咦，我都搞緊呢啲活動喎，下次開會一齊分享下心得啊！
誒，咁人齊，影幅相先啦。好啊，嚟啊嚟啊嚟啊！